course of making videos on this YouTube channel for the last 10 years, I think there's one thing that I've picked up on that almost every guitar player can agree upon, and that is the concept of versatility. Whether it's the guitars that we play, the pedals that we put on our pedal board, or the amps that we plug into, we like to have gear that can do more for us with as minimal amount of effort as possible. Now, I would certainly place myself into that category. I like to have more options available to me in the moment, especially if it's on a gig that requires a whole lot of versatility. But I had an interesting experience a few months ago that kind of challenged my perception of what versatility really means. Although my original hard rock band is on a bit of a hiatus at the moment, my main gig has been playing at my church, Oceans Church in Irvine, California. And over the course of the last 6 months or so, my main guitar for that gig has been the Vola Vosti KJM J2. However, there was one particular Sunday where something really interesting happened. Despite all the options that I had available to me on this guitar, I found myself playing the entire worship set on just the bridge pickup and utilizing just the volume and tone knobs to get my tonal variation. That Sunday was particularly mind-changing because it caused me to start thinking about what could I do if I only had one pickup in the guitar. Now, I don't have a single pickup guitar. I have never owned a single pickup guitar. So in order to get one, I had to put out the call. And my friends at Gibson really came through for me on this one. Now, before we get into my observations and some of the tips I can give you, I do want to make some things very clear up front. This is not a scientific experiment. Everything about this video is purely based on observation and using these guitars in the context of playing with a band, writing songs, or just all in all enjoying playing by yourself. And if you have any questions about the specs of these guitars, this video is not a demo. If you want more information, there are 2 links in the description box down below that'll take you to the respective guitars' web pages. Now, this first observation and tip might be something a little silly to say because it just seems so obvious. But if it's so obvious, why don't more guitar players gravitate towards using it? It's the fact that electric guitars have volume and tone knobs for a reason. And no more place is this more apparent of seeing what they can do than on a single pickup guitar. For example, if I just turn both of the controls up all the way and play this rather distorted, crunchy sound, what if I turn it all the way up and then start turning it down ever so slightly? That's the volume knob at 8 right now, and already the sound's cleaned up a little bit, and it might be more conducive to faster rhythm parts where we don't want that overly compressed sound and overly gainy sound to really muddy things up. But that's just cleaning things up a little bit. What about a lot of it to get a clean sound out of this already crunchy sound? Well, why don't we just go ahead and turn it full up and turn it back until it starts to get to that point of cleanliness where we're the most happy. So naturally, we're able to start with a pretty hefty, saturated, crunchy tone. And we can clean it up ever so slightly to make it more conducive to rhythm guitar. And we can also turn it down even further and get a very nice, pretty, glassy, clean tone. But all of these sounds from full up to clean have the tone knob turned up all the way. When we start incorporating the tone control into it, we can get a bit more tonal variation. Let's start with that clean sound. Just turning that tone knob back to 7 ends up cleaning up the sound a little bit more, but also makes the attack not quite as sharp. But now let's do the same thing, this time going full up and taking a solo. Now we can give ourselves a bit more of a challenge by looking at the SM-1H, which has one humbucking pickup and one knob, a volume knob. But it hides a secret in that it's a push-pull pot. This is one thing that we can think of as another way to get more out of less, by adding on mods to our guitars with less pickups in order to get more out of them. Now we could do anything from putting a treble bleed mod on the volume pot to doing exactly what Kramer does stock, and that's by having a series parallel switch. Plugged into my Orange Rocker Verb 100, this is the clean tone full up with the push-pull pot down. It's a bit muffled, and it's not really the most pleasing clean tone in the world. Well, now we pull up, and we get something that sounds completely different. The simple recognition of the volume and the tone control is kind of a game changer once you hit on it. But this next tip is one that a lot more of us are going to be, one, more familiar with, and two, probably a bit more excited about. And that's talking about pedals. Knowing what pedals to use with these guitars that even with the volume and tone knob control turned up all the way, you get a lot more tonal variation out of it. And there are a few different types of pedals that I think work best in getting more out of single pickup guitars. Compressors, EQs, and overdrive pedals. Compressors are kind of a classic choice. They even out your playing dynamics and help the guitar seem a bit more even. No matter how hard I hit the string, that sound stays clean and consistent. Now we can take a look at pedals that are more gain staging, like overdrive and boost pedals. Now I have a few that I particularly like and I use all the time on my church board. We have the Queen of Tone from NuX, we have the SSS SRV from Vertex, and the Rev Tilt. Overdrive pedals are just as capable of shifting the EQ of a sound. For example, the Queen of Tone has both a Centaur style circuit and a Marshall Bluesbreaker style circuit. Those are two very differently voiced overdrive pedal sounds, but they do impart a certain character to the sound that you're creating. For example, if we turn on the Queen of Tone with all knobs at noon, play that clean, the tonalities are pretty much in the same area, but we don't necessarily want the grit that the clone side is giving us. We want just that flavor, pretty much what everybody does with a Centaur. No gain and a lot of boost, just for that character. We can do exactly that. Now that gives us a different clean tonality, but if we don't want something as crunchy as the rev tilt, we can go ahead and turn on the Morningstar side of the Queen of Tone, which is much more like a Marshall blues breaker. Now we can still use compressors and overdrive pedals with single humbucker guitars to get more tonal variation, but I feel like the best friend pedal of a single humbucker guitar is an EQ pedal, whether that is a graphic EQ pedal, a semi-parametric, or parametric EQ. Being able to re-voice the sound of the pickup going into the front end of your amplifier makes a huge amount of difference. Let's start by just hearing the series sound, or with the push-pull pot down on the SM-1H. Woolly, it's distorting and crushing the front end a little bit. Not exactly something we want for pretty clean. Well, with this particular setting, and I'm shaving off a lot of audio information with the Sonic Tone Group, we think it's something that sounds a lot cleaner and a lot prettier. Now this last observation, this last tip, is really the big one. Mostly because it's the one that's going to be the hardest for you to actually get down. And that's realizing that you are in control of the sound more than the guitar is in control of the sound. So in order to illustrate all this, I want to go back to that sound I used on that fateful Sunday at church, combining the rev tilt with the Walrus Audio Slow, the Keeley Echoes, and the Keeley Hydra running into my Walrus Audio ACS-1. Now, everything that I just played in that little example combines all these different factors, knowing how to manipulate your volume and tone controls, using different pedals to get certain types of sounds, but also knowing where to pick on the guitar to emphasize different types of sounds. For example, with everything turned up all the way, I can get that classic palm mute thing. But by lightening up on how you strike the strings and increasing steadily the force with which you hit the strings, you start emphasizing this rise and gain and saturation that helps drive the energy of the song. Now, if you were paying close attention to that, that wasn't all just playing dynamics. Part of that was also picking at certain points on the guitar. When we got started, I was more or less centered on the guitar body, right about where the waist of this guitar is. Then I started to increase the dynamic of it, starting to hit the strings a little harder. Then at a certain point, I decided to start moving off that palm mute, thus bringing my picking closer to the pickup. The closer that you get to the bridge of the guitar, the more twangy and the more cutting the sound is going to be. What happens if I move the opposite direction, though? The closer you move towards the neck of the guitar, the softer the sound is going to be. Now that definitely comes in handy for single note lines. Just a little bit of a softening of that attack really helps things start to feel a bit fatter. Now that was with a sound that's much crunchier, but we can also apply it to a cleaner sound. So let's recap. You have to be aware of the fact that these guitars have controls for volume, and in the case of the Les Paul Jr., for tone. Those are there for a reason, and even subtle adjustments to the controls can provide a lot of different options for different sounds. Second, knowing the right pedals to use. EQ, compression, heck, even different flavors of overdrive. Having some options that you can play around with on the floor, but keeping the guitar simple is a nice way to work around the limited nature of single pickup guitars. Lastly, the most difficult thing, your own playing dynamics. The relationship between the guitar and the player is often a symbiotic one. What you put into these guitars, they will give out in return. And this is a very hard thing for guitar players to practice because there's no real good technique to do it. But when you start paying attention to the force with which you strike the strings, if you start paying attention to how much tension you're placing on the fretboard when you fret your notes, and even then your position of picking on the guitar body and heck, even on the neck, you'll start getting more tones from just one sound if you know how to practice it. And I wish I had better techniques to share with you, but that's just the way that it is. Thank you all so much for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, I would love your support in helping me make better guitar videos just like this for all types of players. There's a few things you can do, and the simplest is just to click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Of course, it doesn't hurt to give the video a thumbs up and share a link to it with a friend of yours. But I would love it if you went one step above and beyond and joined my email club. I send links to videos just like this one direct to your email inbox. Not to mention, you're also entered into giveaways that I announce here on the channel, and I oftentimes let club members know about them weeks before they go public. Just go to SeanPierceJohnson.com/email, enter your first and last name, and boom, you're in the club. In closing, I want to say a huge thanks to my buddy Cam at Gibson for hooking me up with these two guitars for a little while to experiment with and be able to share the findings with you. Again, if you have any questions about specs, pricing, whatever, there are two links in the description box down below that'll take you to the product pages on the Gibson website for the Les Paul Jr. and the Kramer website for the SM-1H. And of course, I'd like to thank all of you for spending part of your day with me. I certainly hope you enjoyed yourselves. And until we see each other again, I'm Sean Pierce Johnson, wishing you all watching great tone, great health, and of course, happy stomping. Cheers, friends. God bless.